And we continue with section 4. Why we should persuade and persuade well. Persuasion is the act of influencing the mind by arguments or reasons offered, or by anything that moves the mind or passions, or inclines the will to determination. To persuade others to reach truthful conclusions requires trust and credibility, as well as clear definitions and logical arguments. Jesus is described in Luke 2:52 as increasing in wisdom and stature and favor as a young man. Similarly, even if God specially gifts us for some great cause, we still need to grow in favor with others. How do we do this? Building trust and credibility. Good persuasion takes a high level of credibility. Credibility comes from the root word credo, for I believe. We become credible when we live consistently with what we say we believe. A lack of credibility leads to a lack of trust. In his book, The Speed of Trust, businessman Stephen Covey says, simply put, trust means confidence. The opposite of trust, distrust, is suspicion. When you trust people, you have confidence in their integrity and in their abilities. When you distrust people, you are suspicious of them, of their integrity, their agenda, their capabilities, or their track record. Building trust has practical benefits. In his book, Covey demonstrates that when business relationships are built on trust, they can develop more quickly and at a lower cost. Conversely, when trust is slow, the process of reaching agreement slows down and the costs go up, because it takes time and expensive attorneys to devise the complicated contracts they need to protect their interests. The philosopher Aristotle developed a 3-part test for credibility. The first part, Aristotle said, is ethos, demonstrating that you are a good person. People are watching. Do you display good character? The second part, pathos, or passion, is based on how your hearers are led to feel emotion by your approach. Does your message engage them? The third part of credibility is based on a word we've already discussed, logos. Are your arguments well constructed based on proper evidence? Credible people, to Aristotle, are those who can effectively share their passion with others and do so based on good arguments. But there is one more subtle aspect to this kind of credibility. Credibility is as much an attitude on the part of the persuader as it is an event for those being persuaded. Researchers call this the Pygmalion effect, based on an ancient Greek myth about a sculptor whose love for the statue he created moved the goddess Aphrodite to bring it to life. In the Harvard Business Review, J. Sterling Livingston wrote, contrary to what might be assumed, the high expectations of superior managers are based primarily on what they think about themselves, about their own ability to select, train, and motivate their subordinates. If managers have confidence in their ability to develop and stimulate subordinates to high levels of performance, they will expect much of them and will treat them with confidence that their expectations will be met. But if they have doubts about their ability to stimulate subordinates, they will expect less of them and will treat them with less confidence. So while we want those we're persuading to be convinced of our character, to find our arguments moving and to see the logic in what we're saying, there is also a self-fulfilling prophecy aspect to persuasion. People are unlikely to be convinced if we aren't convinced ourselves. Forming a persuasive message. Let's say you have the opportunity to make a presentation to your local city council encouraging members to pass a bill that fights sex trafficking. You've got all your points prepared, but how do you present them in the best way? In the 1940s, a researcher named Alan Monroe tested lots of different ways of organizing persuasive messages. He found that one format is significantly more likely than others to move people to action. There are 5 steps to Monroe's motivated sequence, and I will describe and illustrate with examples of how it might be used to support a presentation opposing sex trafficking. First, attention. Get the attention of your audience using a story, a shocking example, a dramatic statistic, or a memorable quotation. For example, we thought the Civil War ended slavery in America, but we were wrong. 2, need. Audiences are moved to action by their needs. People won't buy a bottle of water unless they're thirsty. Focus on the thirst by making your point relevant to your audience. For example, Sex trafficking occurs when young women are held captive emotionally and forced to meet the sexual desires of others. It isn't just a problem out there, it's a problem here in our own community. 3. Satisfaction. Offer a specific workable solution the people in your audience can actually imagine implementing. For example, fortunately, there are legal powers we can give to our police department to effectively fight this travesty. 4. Visualization. Help your audience see what will happen if the solution is implemented. For example, imagine making our community a place where young women feel safe and protected. And 5 is action. Ask your audience for a specific action. For example, I am asking you today to pass a law based on the codes put together by expert attorneys who are skilled at fighting sex trafficking. Turning hostility into agreement. It's hard to imagine community leaders not wanting to do something about an issue like sex trafficking. On many other issues, however, you'll encounter opposition. This is true even if your arguments are clearly defined, logically supported, and persuasively organized. Here are some suggestions for turning hostility into agreement. Avoid fear appeals. Studies show that fear is an effective appeal only if there is a way for people to act to reduce their fear. And while fear can lead people to accept certain beliefs and attitudes, positive appeals are more likely to change intentions and behavior. Don't insist on being acknowledged as right. People are most likely to be persuaded if they believe they're persuading themselves rather than feeling as if they're being compelled to admit they're wrong. Persuasion expert Elliot Aronson says, self-persuasion is almost always a more powerful form of persuasion, deeper, longer lasting than more traditional persuasion techniques. That is, than being directly persuaded by another person, no matter how clever, convincing, expert, and trustworthy that other person might be. Precisely because in direct persuasion, the audience is constantly aware of the fact that they have been persuaded by another. Don't take shortcuts. I remember someone who disagreed with my political viewpoint telling me, "Your candidate is scary." I dropped the point. Clearly, the other person wasn't interested in hearing what I had to say, but this didn't mean I had been persuaded. Shaming people into believing something or making them feel that their view is uncool doesn't really persuade them. Compelling people to stop arguing doesn't mean they're persuaded that you're right. In fact, people silenced in this way are as likely to switch back to their previous opinions as if they never changed them in the first place. An old saying applies here. A man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. Understand the source of the resistance. Why do people resist change? To answer this, we need to understand what change actually means to people. Generally speaking, people don't resist change per se. Rather, they resist loss of status, security, and comfort. It may be the case that what they're resisting is uncertainty, not change. In fact, resistance to change can actually be a good trait. It keeps people from going on just because, and it opens up the new ways of thinking about an issue. Encourage them to explore why they find it so difficult to agree and ask how you can help. Make your message personally relevant. The personal relevance of a message affects whether people accept it. In a study of students considering whether or not a university-wide exam required for graduation was a good idea, researchers discovered that students told they would be required to take the exam were more likely to consider the strength of the argument than those told the implementation of the exam was 10 years away. Enlist help. Actual feedback is more important in persuading a person to accept an argument than that person's belief that the argument is persuasive. Say something like, "Why don't you take this argument to your friends and see if they have any good responses, then share them with me." Avoiding propaganda and manipulation. Propaganda is mass persuasion that involves manipulating symbols to control people's impressions. Propaganda is a dangerous form of pseudo-persuasion because it manipulates people's prejudices so that the decisions they arrive at seem voluntary, but in reality they are not. The most famous examples of propaganda come from World War II, where posters the German government produced made Jewish people appear evil, And it wasn't just the bad guys who resorted to propaganda. Unfortunately, American posters designed to heighten opposition to Japan's war efforts incited hatred of Japanese people inside of America. As I've taught the art of persuasion over the years, many students have asked, but isn't all persuasion a form of propaganda? After all, when I make arguments to get someone to do something, even if my intentions and strategies aren't evil, am I not still trying to manipulate a person to my point of view? Tragically, many people refrain from persuading others to do what's right because they're afraid of unethical manipulation. Let's sort out the difference between persuasion and manipulation. Persuasion involves arranging ethical arguments to enlighten an audience to the truth. Manipulation involves arranging ethical or unethical arguments to deceive an audience and keep people from seeing the truth. True persuasion isn't just getting people to do what we want, it's getting people to do what's right. Persuasion can be a godly, biblical thing to do as long as you follow certain criteria. Is what you're saying true to the best of your knowledge? Ephesians 4 advises, therefore, having put away falsehood, let each one of you speak the truth with his neighbor, for we're members one of another. Does your message encourage an emotionally healthy response? Ephesians 4:27 cautions, give no opportunity to the devil. Are you seeking the good of others? Matthew 20:28 says, the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. Are you treating others as you would wish to be treated? Luke 6 states, as you wish that others would do to you, do so to them. Are you appealing to righteous motives? In Matthew 18, Jesus said, whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it would be better for him to have a great millstone fastened around his neck and to be drowned in the depths of the sea. Are you leading others to better obey God? Culture shapers need to focus on helping people obey God. In fact, it's part of the Great Commission. Matthew 28 says, Jesus came and said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. Propaganda operates by isolating people from the truth. Having the opportunity to talk about the truth breaks its spell. As French philosopher Jacques Ellul put it, propaganda ceases where simple dialogue begins. All types of clear thinking and speaking, in fact, begin with dialogue. We must learn to dialogue and dialogue well. And that's section 5. Most persuasion doesn't take place in speeches. Someone is unlikely to say, will you give me a 30-minute speech about why you believe in God? Such persuasion is more likely to occur in the context of a dialogue, from dia and logos, literally to think and talk through. Today, persuasion is just as likely to happen at a coffee shop as in a lecture hall. People who dialogue well listen as much as they talk. Their goal isn't just to be right, it's to learn and help others learn the truth. As Ralph G. Nichols and Leonard A. Stevens put it, the talker cannot learn from the listener. Telling doesn't equate with teaching, and getting told certainly doesn't equate with learning. Here's an example of Greg Kuckel shares in his book Tactics. Are any of you in the room God? The professor scanned the audience slowly, looking for takers. No hands went up. God knows truth, she continued, writing the word in all capital letters on the board. All truth is God's truth. God is truth. But you are not God, therefore you only know truth. She then scrawled in lowercase the secondary and substandard take on reality next to the superior version that is forever out of reach for mere humans. She paused for a moment, letting her point sink in, then closed. Have a nice day, she said, and dismissed the class. It was a brilliant piece of rhetorical wizardry. Students were too busy taking notes and worrying whether or not this would be on the test to think carefully about what had been stolen from them, or the ruin this foreshadowed for their faith. The professor's assertions teemed with confusion. What does capital TRUTH, truth, mean? Omniscience? That couldn't be her meaning. That God knows everything and we do not is a trivial observation, hardly a revelation even for college freshmen. Does she mean we can't know things in the way God knows them, that we don't see the world the way He does? Again, not particularly profound. No, the professor was going after the conviction in modernist circles that human beings can actually know something like absolute truth, knowledge they can count on. Instead, she is saying that we mortals inhabit a kind of knowledge twilight where the outlines of reality are vague and indistinct, robbing us of all confidence that anything we think we know is actually so. What would you do if you were in this class? Clearly, you've not been invited to give a formal refutation. The best approach, Kuckel suggests, is to ask questions. Something like this might be appropriate. Professor, I'm confused about your comments. Is this insight you've offered true or false? I don't think you'd knowingly teach us something false, so you must think it is true, and that's what confuses me. What kind of truth would that be? It couldn't be capital truth because you're not God, so it must be little letter truth. But if this is just your personal perception of reality, why should any of us take you seriously? We have our own perceptions. Since none of us has the capital T truth, who's to say who is right and who is wrong? Can you clear this up for me? Tactics is Kuckel's term for navigating the way toward truth through dialogue. It's especially important in situations where we feel we ought to say something, but don't want to make people mad or appear to them as extreme. When someone says something you think needs to be challenged, Kuckel says you have about a 10-second window to get information, buy time, and steer things in a productive direction. Kuckel offers a strategy he calls the Columbo tactic, named after Lieutenant Columbo, a brilliant TV detective who disarmed bad guys with questions. You can start a dialogue by simply asking, "Do you mind if I ask you a question?" Questions display an interest in the person asked, educate you on the other person's perspective, and allow you to make progress on a point without being pushy. Never make a statement when a question will do the job. Consider questions like these. What do you mean by that? This question requests clarification and helps ensure that the dialogue is based on good definitions of the terms being discussed. How did you come to that conclusion? When someone makes an assertion, the ideas on the table are theirs, not yours. It's not your duty to prove them wrong. It's their duty to prove them right. Is what the person claiming possible, plausible, and probable? Is it an argument or just an opinion? Find out by asking clarifying questions instead of trying to win your case. Can I take some time to think about it? Just because someone demands an answer right now doesn't mean you're obligated to give one. Once you understand the other person's point of view, you can work to respond later on your own when the pressure is off. Have you considered this? Can you help me understand? Take the conversation to the next level by going on the offensive without being offensive. Do this by asking questions that expand the conversation rather than narrow it. Be alert to people who try to drive toward the conclusion too quickly by pinning you down to a one-word answer. For example, if someone says, "That may be true for you, but it's not true for me," you could reply, "When I say something is true, I mean to say that it applies to all people everywhere." By saying that it's not true for you, what you're really saying is that I'm wrong. Can you help me understand where I've gone wrong and what reasons you have for saying that? Very few people can be clever on command. It takes a lot of knowledge and skill to be quick on your feet. Be curious, ask thoughtful questions, and then go study some more and return with other questions. The Columbo tactic doesn't so much answer questions as it directs people away from knee-jerk reactions. Once you've done this, the next step is to identify the flaws in wrong views and take the opportunity to inject truth. Kuckel offers some examples here too. Ideas that commit suicide. Some ideas, in their very expression, refute themselves. For example, there is no truth. Is this statement true? You can't know anything for sure. Are you sure about that? Ask if the claim applies to itself. Is truth true? Taking the roof off. Taking the roof off means looking inside an idea to see if it is as true on the inside as it appears on the outside. Many bad arguments, if applied consistently, move toward an unreasonable destination. For example, someone might say, the school should not punish so-and-so for cheating. Jesus would forgive. Disagreeing would seem unforgiving. But as Kuckel says, you can take the roof off and get to the heart of the person's basic argument by asking, are you saying that the school should never punish any wrongdoing? Steamroller. Have you ever tried to discuss truth with someone whose forceful personality seems to roll over everyone else? It's hard to know what motivates steamrollers. Maybe they're just being controlling. Maybe they're prejudiced. Perhaps they're in rebellion. The best response is to try to stop them. Whoa, I feel like whenever I try to bring something up, I don't really have the opportunity to finish my thought. If that doesn't work, just drop it. And always be known as a person who keeps your calm and refuses to respond to rudeness with rudeness. Rhodes Scholar. Ask the other person to supply reasons for saying something. There's a difference between informing and educating. As Kuckel phrases it, when an article tells you why he holds his view, you have been educated. When someone says, scholars agree with me, ask, can you tell me which scholars agree and what reasons they give? Just the facts, ma'am. Some time ago in a discussion, a person asked, how does it affect your marriage if I'm married to my same-sex partner? The question made it seem that I was somehow reserving a right for myself that I wasn't willing for others to have. I recalled Kuckel's point about a TV detective named Joe Friday who often interrupted witnesses' tirades by saying, just the facts, ma'am. Many challenges to Christianity are based on bad information. Ask yourself, what claim is this person making? Is it factually accurate? If you're not sure, you can go back to the question. How did you come to that conclusion? In the instance of the question I asked about marriage, I realized that the person hadn't really made an argument to support the claims that the definition of marriage should be expanded, that same-sex relationships should be called marriage, or even that marriage ought to be about us and what we want. Just asking a question that puts me on the defensive doesn't mean the person has made a valid argument. Instead of answering the question, ask something like, what argument are you making exactly? Or can you share with me the facts that support your argument? Dialogue takes practice, which is good, obviously. But as you work on the things you've learned in this chapter, such as clarifying definitions, making logical arguments, organizing your thoughts, and asking probing questions, you'll improve. Keep truth in perspective. As Kuckel says, if they want to go, let them leave. But don't let them leave empty-handed. Be a good ambassador, a person who is ready, patient, reasonable, tactical, clear, fair, honest, humble, attractive, and dependent on God. Conclusion. Woohoo! Persuasion takes time and trust. Public repentance, as Senator Payne modeled in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, is rare. Yet while conclusions like these happen only in movies like Mr. Smith, the movie portrayed many truths we can apply in our own lives. To paraphrase the Roman orator Quintilian, our goal is to be good people speaking well. Following are some of the takeaways from the Jefferson Smith character that can help us shape culture in credible, even admirable ways. Goodness. Senator Smith had a strong moral core. He knew corruption when he saw it because he had a wholesome, honest understanding of truth. Romans 12 says, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. For by the grace given to me, I say to everyone among you not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think with sober judgment, each according to the measure of faith that God has assigned. Along with cultivating our ability to think well and speak clearly, it's important that you and I stay focused on the Christian virtues of holiness, justice, and love. Scott Ray and Kenman Wong observe that being holy should improve our moral standards and behavior. We should treat employees better. We should seek to be just without being harsh. We should love without showing favoritism or being permissive. At the end of the day, how we treat people more than whether our points are well argued wins them to the truth. Genuineness. Even in the midst of great pressure, Senator Smith remained humble and honorable. 1 Peter 2 says, "Keep your conduct among the Gentiles honorable, so that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day of visitation." Genuinely representing truth makes truth attractive. And as persuasion expert Robert Cialdini says, people prefer to say yes to those they like. Grit. Senator Smith refused to compromise what he knew was true, even under immense pressure. He possessed a quality called grit, which is the tendency to work strenuously toward challenges, maintaining effort and interest over years despite failure, adversity, and plateaus in progress. Grit gets people through tough times. One study found that West Point Military Academy cadets who persevered through their training weren't necessarily the most physically fit or self-disciplined. Grit, the study found, is what got them through. Further, grit was found to be a common community virtue. Charles Duhigg summarized as follows: "To succeed, they need a keystone habit that creates a culture, such as a daily gathering of like-minded friends to help find the strength to overcome obstacles." Goodness, genuineness, and grit aren't qualities we possess on our own. We need others. Hebrews 10 says, "Let us hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who promised is faithful. And let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works, not neglecting to meet together as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near." Mr. Smith Goes to Washington is more fairy tale than reality, but its call to be open-hearted and clear-minded, not hard-bitten and cynical, is one worth heeding. Speaking the truth in love is how we grow up in Christ. Yay, the end.